Good morning. Okay, good morning. Let's
Good
hear it.
morning.
Good morning.
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 All right, welcome to the Vashon Island Unitarian Fellowship. I'm Jeff Cole, and I'll be your service leader for today. We are a lay-led community strengthened and enriched by weaving together the volunteer contributions of members and friends. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you are welcome. If you are new, we are especially glad you are here. Please participate as you feel comfortable in our online Sunday services and to stay for conversation following the end of the service. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional homelands of the Bobs, the Stillwater people who have lived here since time immemorial. We are honored to steward that land that remains significant to their descendants, especially the Puyallup tribe, who have treaty rights in these waters. You'll notice that today, some traditional parts of our program, Joys and Concerns and the offering, will come after our speakers. In the spirit of being fully present, the chat room will be closed during the service. Let's settle in now, slow our minds, put aside the thoughts and cares of our lives for a little while. Take a deep breath. Take another and sigh as you breathe out. And relax for just a few more seconds. Let's take a little break. Let all the cares and the thoughts, the world, drift away as you breathe. Now Judy will light the chalice and do our chalice reading.
I now light the chalice with these words by Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Now, Ann Lewis will start our program by reading The Heart of Our Faith.
The Heart of Our Faith by Monica Jacobson Tennyson. What is it that calls you here, that calls you onward, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make that change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? It is relationship, the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, our truths, this air, our hearts.
Right?
Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you
Today, we are privileged to hear from two of our fellowship members, Sheila Ekman and Ted Claybaugh, as they share their spiritual and ethical journeys with us. One of the questions we asked them is, did you arrive at the Vashon Island Unitarian Fellowship? We each have our own unique answer to that question. I wonder what Sheila and Ted will say. First, Sheila will speak. Then we'll have a short time of silent reflection before I introduce Ted. After Ted speaks, there will be another short time for silent reflection. And as most of you know, both Sheila and Ted have generously shared their considerable talents and energy with our fellowship and with the Vashon community in countless ways for quite a few years. In addition to serving our fellowship in many ways, since she arrived, Sheila has served as our president. The other causes that I know she has been involved in are the Alliance for Tompontika Conservation and the Vashon Pet Protectors. Let's see, just a second. Instead of giving more detail about her life, I will let Sheila speak for herself. Sheila, you're on.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I don't know how many of you listened to the On Being podcast with Krista Tippett. Her first question to every interviewee is, what is the religious or spiritual background of your childhood? I always love to hear the way people answer this question. It seems to provide not only a clue to who they are, but a base by which to measure how their thinking and beliefs have evolved over time. So that's where I'm going to start. My earliest recollections include thinking about God and Jesus and church. My mother told a story about me as a young child seeing Casper the Friendly Ghost on TV and saying, "Oh, look, there's the Holy Ghost." I must have been listening in Sunday school. Growing up in a close, extended Pennsylvania German family in a rural area shaped my earliest religious beliefs. We attended a small Union church, which held both Lutheran and Reformed services. Alternate Sundays, we used a different hymnal and recited a slightly different service. I still remember that the Lutherans had the red hymnals and the Reforms had the black ones. Most of my family, extended family, attended the same church and had for generations. In fact, an ancestor donated the land on which the church was built in 1850. My grandfather was on the church council, my aunt was the organist, and my mother sang in the choir. I was related to probably half of the people in the church. Looking back, I realized it was a very traditional, but somewhat liberal theology, no hellfire preaching or being born again, but also not very full of spirit or joy. It was comforting and predictable and just a part of life. I was very involved in the church, Sunday school, youth group, and other activities, and have fond memories growing up there. For me, religion or spirituality was predetermined and intricately interwoven with family and community. I was never much exposed to other religious beliefs. In our community, Catholicism was considered the other religion. In high school, there were a few Jewish kids. I can't imagine what it was like for them. Of course, I began questioning when I grew to adolescence, but only within the Christian context. I remember taking Lutheran catechism classes and being really insulted by an illustration of 3 different interpretations of communion: Catholic, Reformed, and Lutheran. The Catholic and Reformed illustrations had big red X's over them. That felt really narrow-minded and self-righteous to me. I also remember questioning why in my church only men acted as ushers and only boys could light the candles on the altar. When I was in high school, my family began attending another church, and we all took a turn into more evangelical Christianity. This was before the evangelical church itself took a hard turn to the political right. Still, it was a pretty prescribed world. There was good and evil, right and wrong, and little room for anything in between. Anyone who was not us was to be convinced that they were wrong and we were right. I can see why people stay in this world. It provides structure and a sense of certainty. To an extent, it also absolves ourselves from looking at uncomfortable realities about the world. Several years ago, I asked my mother what she thought of climate change. She replied with, "God will take care of us." I also experienced a serious health crisis in high school when I was diagnosed with tuberculosis. I don't remember much of my internal life at the time, but I know that I became more introspective, and I'm sure it was the first time I really had to think about mortality. I became much more interested in evangelical Christianity, and when I went to college, joined a Christian group. I never had a flash of lightning experience, but considered myself born again and read the Bible and prayed regularly. This was during the early 70s when there were Jesus freaks, before the time when the evangelical church turned to radical right-wing politics and became a more narrow, bigoted force. My born again days oddly coincided with the fact that I realized I was lesbian. What a conundrum. I spent some years coming to terms with my sexual orientation, all the while trying not to be gay, since I considered it a sin, or at least not God's will. That was a really hard time for me, spiritually and psychologically. And looking back, I'm thankful that I came through the shame, unhappiness, and depression. It took so much energy that could have been used more positively. Another immense early influence on my beliefs about everything was my involvement in Girl Scouting, especially summer camp. I loved the out of doors and I loved camp. All through college and for years after, I spent summers working as a counselor and then camp director at summer camp. I attribute much of what I am spiritually today to that experience. I met people that had different beliefs and backgrounds. I made close and long-lasting friends. I discovered feminism, went through wonderful times and terrible times, and ultimately realized how much I am connected to the earth and the natural world. In my 30s, I moved away from evangelical Christianity, but still searched for a place within the Christian church. I felt that Christianity was the ultimate truth, but struggled to find a place in a religious community that did not validate my experience as a woman or a lesbian. I did find some spiritual homes, but I also moved around a lot during that period, so never was able to find a deep connection anywhere. Another turning point for my beliefs was reading The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler. This was probably the most influential book I've ever read. It made sense to me on so many levels and allowed me to see history, human history, and our current world cultures in a whole new way. For those who are not familiar with the book, it's hard to summarize, but she argues that over 5,000 years ago, the earth was largely inhabited by more egalitarian goddess-worshiping cultures. At that time, there was a great shift and more patriarchal religions and cultures became more dominant, as they are today. I began to see that as women, we live in a somewhat occupied world based on domination and power, not cooperation. I began to separate the notion of God from gender. I began to notice remnants of these early cultures in present day indigenous cultures and even hidden in patriarchal religions. During the last few decades, I've developed a lot of questions about the meaning of life and my beliefs, but mostly just concentrated on living. I've moved past thinking that there has to be one truth or one ultimate reality, and can see that there can be many truths and many paths. I don't believe in a male personal God, but I still believe that there's something greater than ourselves. It might just be a universal consciousness of all life, or it might be something larger that we really can't understand. I don't know. I believe there are many mysteries that our puny human minds can't grasp. I believe that as humans, we are not greater than the rest of living things. We are only one part of an incredible balanced web of life. Looking back, I remember an important experience when I was about 12 or 13, walking alone through the fields behind our house and stopping to look eye to eye with a red fox. We both stopped, made a connection, and then moved on. Another time, as an adult, I remember being in a much loved outdoor place and touching the ground with my palm. I felt something alive, though I can't describe or explain it. I'm greatly drawn to earth-based spirituality and worship. I felt a oneness with the earth at certain places and in certain indigenous cultures that resonates with me. I came to the Unitarian Fellowship because I do value the presence in my life of a spiritual community, but I wanted one that challenges me and helps me develop a personal spiritual practice. Specifically, I started attending VIUF when gay marriage was legalized, and I saw that there was a spiritual community that was celebrating that event. As a lesbian woman, I've never felt unwelcome or devalued by this community. I'm also a member of the Puget Sound Zen Center. Over the past few years, my beginning meditation practice and the study of Buddhist principles have taught me many things. Everything is connected. Everything is impermanent. Meditation has made me question my thinking and get past the idea that I have a permanent individual self. It has reinforced my beliefs that everything and everyone is connected. It's encouraged me to accept things the way they are and know that the only certain things are impermanence and change. It's made me more open-minded and open-hearted. I believe that the world we live in has largely been shaped over millennia by patriarchy, domination, and racism. I believe that these forces have led to our current climate crisis and social instability. Joanna Macy calls this time the Great Turning, which I think is a good description. None of us know if the human species will survive, and if it does, what the world will be like. Personally, I think we've reached the climate tipping point. I'm pretty pessimistic about the survival of the human species, but who knows? Mostly, I have found myself really pondering the question, how do we live in these times? Looking back, I've come a long way from believing in certainty and stability, one God, one truth, one way of doing things. I now recognize many truths, many ways of being in the world. I try to honor myself and my connection to every other living thing. I try to find a way to live with integrity and compassion in the midst of an uncertain future. I find spiritual connection through walking in the woods, meditating, and making art. My spiritual practice and beliefs continue to change and evolve as I age, and I hope it will always be that way. Thanks for listening.
Judy, you're on mute there, Judy.
Now we will have a few moments of silence to reflect on Sheila's words. All right, now we will hear from Ted. And let me say a few words first. Edward Claybaugh, known to us as Ted, has benefited Vashon with his considerable talents as an attorney for many years. He has been active in establishing or saving most of the island institutions at one time or another, right up to the present day. Now we will hear about Ted Klayball's spiritual and ethical journey and his story about how he happened to arrive among us at the Vashon Island Unitarian Fellowship. Ted, you're on.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Judy. What I'm going to say this morning is going to be very difficult for me. Vicki knows what I'm going to say, and it's going to be very difficult for her also, because it's going to raise some very unpleasant memories. But let me begin with my childhood. My journey to VIUF began when I was about 6 or 7, when I saw my grandmother, Maud Thompson, lying on her day bed in the parlor between her dining room and her living room. She had rheumatoid arthritis, her legs were bent, her hands were gnarled, and she could not sit up or walk. But she had a low bed, a low table beside her bed, and on that low table was a black book. I asked her one day what the book was, and she said it was a Bible. And I asked her, what did the Bible say? What was in it? And she said the Bible was about God. She showed it to me, and I saw some pictures in it that I thought were very interesting. She said they were pictures by painters from long ago who had painted scenes from the Bible. Well, I was intrigued by that. And that coming Christmas, my parents got me a Bible, and I began to read it. I couldn't really read it for a couple of years, and then I was only able to read portions of it because the language, in the old King James Version was so difficult. But I continued reading it. At that time, Bible comics were popular, and each one of the comics had a story about one of the epic adventures in the Bible, and I devoured those. But I kept wondering why God kept ordering the Israelites, his chosen people, to kill people, including men, women, and children. My family did not go to church. My parents thought they were primarily inhabited by hypocrites, but I occasionally read small portions of the Bible. I was developing faith, however, which continued to develop for many years. Fast forward to 1971, when Vicki and I got married. We were living in Marina del Rey in Southern California, and I was going at that time to Garden Grove Community Church in Garden Grove, California. So Vicki and I would make the long drive down to Garden Grove, where Dr. Robert Schuller had built a magnificent glass edifice that he called the Crystal Cathedral. And Dr. Schuller specialized in celebrity guests and extravaganzas, and his guests would extol the power of possibility thinking, which is what Dr. Schuller preached. And I remember at his extravaganzas at Easter and Christmas, he would have camels, live camels and donkeys and sheep come down the aisle. Vicki has a memory of being sprayed by urine from one of the camels as it went down the aisle. And he also at Christmas would have human angels flying overhead, suspended from wires. Well, we finally, when we moved to, after we found out we were pregnant and moved to Pacific Palisades to a home, then it was too long a drive to make down to Garden Grove. So we found a small Episcopal church not far from where we lived. So we started going to that small church. It had a swimming pool a small church. It was set on 52 acres. It had a school and a large gym. So in the summertime, our family would often go out and sit around the pool with other people from the community. And it was very enjoyable. I served on the vestry, and we joined a group called the Candle Lighters. That group had been formed by a new young associate priest who had come to help the elderly priest who was serving the church. He was very sociable and outgoing and had wanted to get to know the young people in the church. So he had formed the Candle Lighters, which met once a month at each other's homes. From those groups, Vicki and I, made some of our very close friends. We went to church most Sundays. Our daughter Liz and our son McAllister, after they were originally born, used to be tended to by volunteers, but when they got older, they went to Sunday school. In 1987, when we went to Vashon, we didn't go there voluntarily. We were forced to move there. And that's a long and difficult story. I had put together a limited partnership to buy property in Rifle, Colorado, in advance of the oil shale boom, which I knew was going to happen. I was not able to raise all the funds that I needed to buy 50 acres of potential residential land in Rifle, but I was only able to raise money for 20% of it. And I had already put down a deposit with the farmer who owned the land. And if I couldn't complete the purchase, we were going to lose that deposit, which we could ill afford. So I had met a man several years before, and I went to him to see if he would possibly loan me the money for the remaining 80%. He agreed to do so, but at a very high interest rate. And he required that I give him a mortgage on the 2 apartment buildings that we owned in Venice, California, which I did. That was in February of 1989. In the summer of 1989, Carter signed into law the Energy Security Act of 1989. 1979. And, the oil shale boom was on. Occidental Petroleum came in and bought the property that we had bought that would have given us an enormous profit. But it wasn't long after that. Well, based on that profit that I was sure we were going to achieve, I then found another commercial property at the interchange of Interstate 70 and the highway that went from Interstate 70 up through Rifle to the Wyoming border. And I was able to raise money for that one pretty quickly. But again, I needed money for our share in the property. So once again, I went to my lender and asked him to give me a loan. This time he agreed, but he wanted a mortgage on our house, which I gave him. So in 1990, when Ronald Reagan came into office, he quickly did away with the Energy Security Act, and the great land boom that had resulted from the oil shale boom in Colorado dissipated, and all that property went back to farmland. I was left with a claim against a company that had wrongfully claimed I had sold my property to them. They claimed I had an agreement with them, but I didn't, because I had never signed an agreement with them. I had signed one with Occidental Petroleum, but when Occidental learned that I had that claim against the property, they didn't want it anymore. So they backed away. And so I was left with nothing but a lawsuit against the firm that had filed that wrongful claim. We went to trial in Glenwood, Colorado, won that trial, but then they promptly appealed it. And that appeal then went up to the Colorado Supreme Court. The Supreme Court read the findings of fact and conclusions of law that the trial judge had made, which were very detailed, but he forgot to say one thing, that my opponents were guilty of what they had done. So he sent it back down to the trial court to have it retried. So we had to have another trial. All the time that this was going on, we were living with Vicky's sister on Vashon Island, and that was very difficult for us. You know, I was commuting to Southern California to practice law. Vicky and the kids were behind, and it was hard on me, but much harder on them, especially on Vicky and our son. When he was in high school, he tried to commit suicide, but thankfully he failed. But Vicky was left on her own to deal with that because I was in Southern California, and she had to find a mental hospital for him and counseling for him. It took us about almost 12 years to get that lawsuit resolved. And then after I finally got it resolved, then I had to fight the man who had made the loans to me, who claimed that he had all the money, that he was entitled to all the money, and which would have left us with nothing. Now, go backwards in time for several years from when I began commuting. One day when I was commuting, I was in an almost empty plane, and I saw a young man who was sitting by a window reading a Bible. I was intrigued by that, so I went over and sat down with him. I asked him if he was a minister. He said that he was a missionary for a group called Telios, which was a group that established small men's Bible study groups around the country. I asked him if he knew of any such group in Southern California. He told me he did and gave me a card for a lawyer in Century City near where my office was. Through him, I contacted a man named Skip Smith, who had a small men's Bible study group that I began attending on a weekly basis in Southern California. And Skip asked me to begin writing the weekly summaries that he handed out to each of the members before each of the weekly meetings. And I really enjoyed that and learned a lot. During all this time, the only thing that sustained me in those dark days was my faith in God. When after my opponent tried to, or sued us, then he agreed to mediation. And we entered into an agreement for binding mediation that could not be overturned, that it could not be, any lawsuit could not be filed on it, but it would be binding, and whoever won would win. We won that lawsuit, and he promptly then filed suit against me. And so we were now in a conundrum. rather than go to court and have to spend all that time which could have taken years on appeals, we decided to see if we could compromise. So I went to a man who was very close to the Telios groups and who was a partner in a well-known financial and investment firm in Los Angeles. And he agreed to be a mediator between the two of us. We then were able to enter into a compromise, basically, and my opponent, agreed he would take our house and our apartments, and Vicky and I got the money. And with that, we were able to buy our house on Vashon and have some left over. So during those years, from the time that we had been going to the Episcopal Church, which we had left because a new priest had come in that we did not connect with, our basic focus had been on the Vashon Community Care Center. But finally, in about 2015, we decided we wanted to join the Catholic Church, at least take a look at it, because we had lots of friends who were going to the Catholic Church. So we took the year-long classes that were required, that we had to take before we could join the church. And something happened because apparently the young priest who had taken over for Father Roche had not looked at the questionnaire we had filled out, on which I had said that I had been married before. So apparently just a week or less before we were going to be recognized as members of the church, he called us into his office and said we couldn't become Catholics because I had been married before and I'd have to get the ceremony annulled. Well, that wasn't going to work, no way. So we left the Catholic Church, and I'm glad that we did, because I don't think that would have worked out. So I didn't go to church for a while, and in the summer of 2016, I got really sick. And during that summer and the fall of 2016, I basically lost all the faith that I had had my entire life. I thought God had deserted me, that I didn't deserve God, that I had made too many mistakes, and I just felt very lost. In early 2017, one Sunday, Vicky said she was going to VIUF and asked me if I wanted to go. To my surprise and to hers, I said yes. On the way up there, I thought to myself, I didn't know if it was going to be helpful. I knew I felt very, very lost and alone. I was looking for community, as was Vicky. And I thought, well, if I don't like it, then I just won't go back. But when we got up there, I was struck by the very warm and friendly welcome at the door of Lewis Hall, and walking in and seeing all the people hugging each other and greeting each other in love. And then I was struck by the initial words of the service leader, and then the sharing of joys and concerns, and the song, There Is a Love, and then singing out the children to go to Sunday school with Go Now in Peace, and those marvelous words, Go now in peace, may the spirit of love surround you. I wept silently when I heard those words, and I thought, this is what an illuminating, light-filled thing to have in church. I had never heard that before, never seen it before, never heard joys and concerns before. I thought this is just a marvelous place. I found that members, after the services, enjoyed each other and shared time together at the coffee hour. And I decided to return the following week and the week after that and the week after that. And then I joined the Social Justice Committee that Melvin was so active in, and found out about the group that was going to the Northwest Detention Center to support the families and friends of those who had been incarcerated for being undocumented persons. And that facility is now known as the ICE Processing Center, and also got involved in the monthly dinners that were being served by VIUF members in the basement of the Episcopal Church. I love the fact that this place was so socially active. Now, backwards in time again, after we arrived on the island, having been involved in a fellowship, a small Bible study group in Southern California, I looked around to see if there was one on the island, and I found one, and it met Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. And so I started going to that. Each week a different member would lead the service. There was not any ministerial leadership, but a different member would lead the service and read from a mutually agreed upon chapter of the Bible. I finally left that group because I found that they talked a lot about the problems in the world and on the island, but took absolutely no action. Vicki and I both, after we talked about it and had been going to the church, for VIUF for about a year, we decided to join. It was one of the best decisions we have ever made. I found it interesting that people with so many different beliefs, including but not limited to atheism, agnosticism, and Judaism, could join together in harmony in services based on love, that Unitarians welcomed all beliefs, races, creeds, sexes, and sexual orientations and gender identifications. If only that could occur throughout the world, I thought. Many had escaped from the ritual, often narrow-mindedness, and often enmity toward people of color and LGBTQ sexual orientation of many mainstream churches. That was so refreshing. To me, members of VIUF were acting as Jesus taught, to love one another as you love yourself. I'm tremendously thankful that Unitarians welcome all beliefs. I now have a new international version of the Bible that has extensive footnotes. Many footnotes contain references to archaeological and historical records that confirm events in the Bible. I continue to read it on a fairly regular basis, and my faith, which had been totally lost, was restored at VIUF. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Ted. We'll have a few minutes of silence to think about Ted's talk. And one more thing I do need to tell you that I forgot is I do believe in the Holy Trinity. Now, Mary will have some music for us.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
Thank you, Sheila and Ted. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your journeys. Because that's a lot to think about. We're going to try something a little bit different today. We're a little short of time, but I think we'll take about 5 minutes. Ted and Sheila have agreed to have a little conversation with anybody who wants to comment or ask questions about their journeys. And so we'll have a few minutes of that.
So Jeff, do we just speak?
Yeah, Julia, and I'm trying to find Sheila to highlight her.
Oh.
There you are.
Okay, I just commenting on both you speakers, Sheila and Ted. I just so appreciate hearing all that you have shared about your experiences. But one thing that strikes me is just how both of you had huge clouds of challenges for years and years, not just a single event. And you emerged from that and found ways to seek the light and that's what we all hope out of our challenges, that they don't crush us and we find a way forward. And so I appreciate that from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Do I see anybody raising their hands? Oh, I see Anne. Thank you.
Just like Julia said more eloquently, I'm just very struck by your courage, both of you. The stories of courage that you shared in the past, and maybe even more, your courage to bear yourselves and share with us today. I'm very deeply moved, and I appreciate it.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Anne.
Oh, I'm sorry. Robbie, sorry. You're on mute. Robbie, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, am I gone?
You're here.
Oh, I was going to say something about how kind of it's such a road to safety. You know, I think that somehow when we find places where we actually feel, I don't know, I used to, the few times that I have felt it so strongly in my life, it's kind of, this is kind of a weird analogy, but it's kind of like being in bath water that's just exactly the right temperature. You know, you just feel totally kind of surrounded and safe and good. And I'm just glad that that as a community that we're here for that, for all of us. Well, thank you guys for sharing.
I like the bath water.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yeah, Catherine?
Yeah,
Catherine?
I'll try. Hold on just a second. I think I'm muted.
No, you're not.
Okay, good. I'm doing it on my phone because I have to still be a mom. So Zoom sucks, but I appreciate it because I appreciate being able to do both things, being able to be part of this church and hearing your stories and be a mom. Score is 0-0 if anybody wants to know. But I just thank you both for sharing with us. You know, last week or a couple weeks ago, I've forgotten when we had the discussion about the incidents that happened. It was hard. It's hard. And so hearing your stories was reaffirming. So thank you for sharing.
Does anyone else have?
I think maybe
Question.
one more, if we have one more.
Yeah, oh, I see Alex.
Hi, I'm so very grateful that I got on this morning. I'm in Florida right now, and I feel so grateful to you, Ted and Sheila. I have missed coming to our Sundays, and I just feel that this was a treasure, and I feel very honored to be witness to what you shared. And this is my community, and I love you all so very much. I'm there even if I'm not there, but I'm so glad I'm there or there today. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ted and Sheila particularly.
Can we just all give ourselves a hug that goes out to everybody?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you. There'll be more time after the service also for conversations. We can continue then. Let's move on to say to joys and concerns. As a caring community,
She's gonna say it.
we set aside time for joy